One of the recurring questions people ask when choosing where to work is, what's the real difference between a startup or a scale-up and a corporation? And which one suits me better? You've probably heard the stereotypes. Big companies are slow, bureaucratic, and innovation killing. Scale-ups are chaotic, underpaid, and full of toxic managers. So what's actually true? I'm Mike. I've worked in pharma, tech, and consulting. I've held C-level roles in global organizations, and I have degrees in business, HR, and psychology. On this channel, I analyze why companies behave the way they do, and I help you navigate the working world. Today, we're talking about corporate versus scale-up. Let's get stuck in. Before we begin, I'm flexible in how I use startup and scale-up. Technically, they're different stages, but from an employee perspective, the mechanisms are largely the same. Most hiring happens during the scale-up phase. What matters for this video is that we're talking about relatively small, relatively new companies that are growing at a high speed. Also, companies move through a life cycle. They start in founder-driven chaos, they accelerate through the scale-up phase where growth outruns structure, and eventually they mature into corporations with layers and processes and policies. Most of what you feel as an employee is simply the side effects of where the company is on this life cycle. In a scale-up, especially before any IPO, the owners or founders are the center of the universe. They are involved in everything. They make the final call. And because the company is small, their personality and work habits dominate the culture. If the owner works 100-hour weeks, that behavior becomes the norm, even if it's not said aloud. Everyone sees it and the pressure follows. In a corporation, the CEO still matters, but their influence is filtered by layers of management and processes and structure. Even a strong personality doesn't shape the daily culture in the same way in a corporation. A toxic CEO at a corporation doesn't necessarily make the whole company toxic, but in a scale-up, it almost certainly will. Go to pretty much any large organization, you're going to have at minimum a chief financial officer, a chief people officer, and a chief operating officer, and the CEO. That's rarely the case in scale-ups. Maybe on paper you might have those titles, but in a small organization of 10, 20, or 200 people, you don't have the same economies of scale and the need for specialization that you have in large organizations. A vast majority of roles in smaller scale-ups are going to be hybrid roles. The finance guy also does payroll. The marketing guy might also be responsible for whatever resembles HR. And the chief operating officer is likely also responsible for facilities, the reception, and the mailroom. What this means initially is that you can't always expect the job to be as clean-cut as described in the job ad. They might be looking for somebody who knows something about procurement, but if things are busy, it's not unlikely that you'll get asked to help with packing some boxes one day because the usual guy called in sick and the customers needed their items. And now, is that good or bad? That depends on you. If you want predictability and a clearly defined role, corporate life is for you. If you want variety, ambiguity, and the chance to follow where the river flows, scale-up life is going to fit better. This generalist structure also drives the way people get promoted. Scale-ups often don't know what they need tomorrow, and hiring takes too long. So when something needs doing, managers look around at who's available, who's willing, and who's capable. That creates opportunity, especially for people who work hard and put their hand up. Promotions are fast, inconsistent, and sometimes unfair, but they do happen. In corporations, promotions are slower but more structured. They rely on formal processes, evaluations, talent reviews, budget, timing. That reduces bias, but also limits opportunity. There are just fewer openings, and there's a lot more competition for those openings. Considering the fact that promotion and development is much more opportunistic in scale-ups, it's going to lead to people being in roles where they're not seasoned experts. They're not going to be the best specialists, and they're not going to be the best managers up front. They simply don't have the experience, the training, or the sort of cultural schooling that you get from navigating bigger organizations. The myth is that managers in scale-ups are terrible and often toxic, but they don't have to be. But they are often inexperienced. And your corporations? Managers are typically more experienced, both in terms of the field they're working with, but also in terms of pure people management. They're going to tend to be older and more experienced. In a lot of ways, that's preferable, but depending on the organization, it can lead to some level of lack of dynamism, especially in long-running organizations. My little channel here is still in the scale-up stage. If you are enjoying the content and you want to help my channel grow and become the big old corporation or something similar, then click the subscribe button. It's hugely appreciated. Thanks a ton. Scale-ups are going to tend to not have processes for anything. That's part of what comes to the company when it starts to mature. There's no policy for travel, there's no tool for expenses, your contract is potentially half illegal, and the odds are that the company doesn't even know it. Hiring is random and ad hoc. Promotion, like I said before, is opportunistic, and salary reviews are a process only in the sense that you go to the owner and shout, give me more or I leave, and depending on how much they need you, they do or don't give you some money. Once you're in a corporation, no matter how dynamic you want to be, you are likely at a size where certain government regulations apply that didn't apply at 200 employees. You've got increased scrutiny from regulators. You can't get away with treating customers badly because you'll be on the front page of the New York Times. The corporation starts to have rules in place, and these rules regulate bad behaviors. They regulate priorities in terms of strategy. They regulate managers and people. They're mostly there for a good reason, but they do slow the organization down in terms of decision making. It inherently makes the organization more risk averse, and it kills spontaneity. At its very worst, it's bureaucratic and soul destroying, and at its best, it makes things flow and ensures a level and simple playing field in a huge and complex organization. And for the scale-up, you've guessed it, it's the opposite. More things are ad hoc, more things are seat-of-the-pants decisions. This allows for quick decision-making. Adapting to market conditions and customer feedback is something you do almost on the fly. Decisions are made almost on a day-to-day basis, and you don't need a 50-page decision memorandum to get anything done. That dynamism is what drives these organizations forward. But why did Jimmy get promoted? I don't know. We needed him, I suppose. Why wasn't Anne promoted? She wasn't ready. There's usually a high level of inconsistency that you can experience as an employee and also as a customer. And yes, you come to work tomorrow and whatever decision was made the day before might not be what applies today. It's hard to say anything definitive about salaries because a lot will depend on the kind of funding a scale-up has, the brand and position the corporation has, and the salaries being paid by competitors. But as a general guide, not a rule, I'd say startups are generally going to be paying less. They're going to be more likely to try to offer you some sort of incentive program that doesn't pay as much in cash upfront. It's going to be more inconsistent simply because they don't have the market insights that big companies pay for. The benefit is you can negotiate. In corporations, there's always this inherent message that they tell you what your pay is, and you really feel it's an actual negotiation. The smaller companies don't have the funds, and they absolutely do, when possible, try to incentivize people with the potential for growth and development. And depending on the industry, the story of getting in on the ground floor and being part of building something huge. It's also going to be more inconsistent. Those processes that at least try to ensure that all people with similar roles have more or less similar salaries are just not in place yet. But as an individual, you've got yourself more room to make your own argument. You can, after all, just walk down to the owner and have a chat with them if you want to. If you're in the corporation, you're not getting access to Sundar Pichai to talk about salaries. In the smaller company, when things go well, it's more likely to be actively celebrated. It's more likely that people will be relatively immediately rewarded in some way, where the corporation will wait till the end of the year where the final EBIT is calculated and the bonus KPIs have been tallied up. All things being equal, startups are going to be busier working environments in a like-for-like comparison with a big corporation. And I say like-for-like because Amazon is a corporation now, and they are very open about the fact that their working environment is massively competitive. It's intense, it's even brutal. Microsoft, though, isn't. But I bet that being at Amazon in the scale-up years was on average busier for everybody than it is today. Why? Because in scale-ups, you hire for culture and effort, not for skills.
We would talk to everybody in the building at least once and maybe a couple times and then come back for another round of interviews, and then we'd all get together and talk about it.
Decided we liked them enough to show them the Macintosh prototype, and then we sat them down in front of it. And if they just kind of were bored or said, this is a nice computer, we didn't want it. We wanted their eyes to light up.
Time is of the essence, and getting something done fast is just more important than getting stuff done right. Again, all other things being equal. So there's going to be more pressure to work more, to put in more effort, and to go the dreaded extra mile. Once you get to corporation size, you can't completely hire for culture. Sometimes you just need a person to do payroll or do operational procurement. And that person, together with the receptionist and the facilities people and a whole lot of others, are not going to be willing to work scale-up hours. So the overall population of the company just takes on a more balanced demographic where not everybody is there to work till their fingers bleed. And you get layers of managers, each of which applies some level of their own expectations on their people and their teams. Things just get mellowed out a bit more compared to the hectic vibe of the scale-up. This is one of the reasons why you hear CEOs in big companies talking about going back to the scale-up roots. It's because the speed disappears. Scale-ups also skew younger for a whole lot of reasons. Younger founders, younger hires, lower salaries, the difficulty of getting into corporate, and faster turnover. This does create stronger social environments with parties and Friday beers and foosball tables. People are early in their lives and in their careers, and they spend more life socializing at work. Corporate environments are going to tend to be more mixed and older. People have families, responsibilities, and aren't looking to socialize at the office bar every week. As an HR executive at Microsoft once told me, the people at a startup want money and vibe. Our people at Microsoft want 401ks and health benefits. Office politics are a thing in corporations. Friendships and cliques are a thing in scale-ups. No matter where you are, there's going to be some level of politics in both sizes of organization. But the way those politics rear their head has its nuances. Office politics in bigger organizations is more subtle and less visible. In the scale-up, who likes who calls the shots, and who has the ear of the owner is visible for everybody to see. When it turns toxic, the nepotism and favoritism is overt. Everybody knows who the kings and queens are, and if somebody is bumping uglies with an important person, everybody knows. The corporation has the same things, but it's just more refined. The main thing to consider is that in the bigger corporations, power and influence is more diluted simply because there are more people. That means that it's rarely one person that can tip the scales. So getting things done happens through an intricate network of relationships and support systems where everybody helps each other out in different ways. Being able to navigate these sometimes implicit systems and these tacitly spoken rules is a very different game compared to the overt stakeholder management of scale-ups. I tend to say that office politics in the scale-up favors the aggressive approach, where corporations favor those that master the wily and more subtle approach. Overt uses of power are just less prevalent in big corporations. Culturally, the scale-up is in the mode of grow or die. There's a cliff ahead and it's visible to everybody. This affects the mindset of the owner and everybody in the building. For corporations, the cliff is rarely visible, so protection, stability, and preserving status quo become a dominant theme. Even in high-growth sectors, big organizations will be acting more predictably, and this will affect how they respond to challenges, and there will be a higher sense of urgency in general in the smaller companies. It's also why you see that workload effect I spoke of in the scale-ups. So, I've said, workload in scale-ups is, all things being equal, going to be higher. I've also said that the salary is likely going to be lower. Challenges are more immediate, and the consequences are also more immediate. What does that mean? Well, change is going to happen more often, and there's more risk. And these things drive lower levels of psychological safety for individuals. You are literally more at risk of losing your job or getting screamed at in a heat of the moment argument in a scale-up under pressure compared to a big corporation. And because those HR policies aren't in place and the mood of the owner is felt by everybody, it can potentially be a more uncomfortable place to work. So where will you fit in? Well, scale-up is for you if you're younger. It's for you if you're more open to change and more comfortable with the risk. You're comfortable with ambiguity and you're cool with taking a chance. You're also likely not locked into a career path yet. You want to try things out and you want to see where things take you, and you're not up for the nuance of navigating corporate politics. You're likely more fast-paced in mindset and having not a 80-20, but even a 70-30 approach, and being a generalist is just more appealing to you. You also want space to define how you get things done, and you're up for immediate reward. And the corporation? You prefer stability and predictability. You don't thrive in constant change and uncertainty. You have a clear idea of what you want to work with, and to some degree you want to specialize or get good at whatever it is that interests you. You also want to surround yourself with people you can learn from within your field. You value the stability and certainty of the large organization, and you find value in processes and predictability. Scale-ups aren't toxic. This is a key point that I want to make. I think scale-up lovers will even say that the way that I describe corporate organizations sound toxic. But it's all down to the eyes that see. And all things being equal, and I've said this a couple of times, the scale-up is more likely to evoke feelings of toxicity than the corporation. And it's down to the nature of the scale-up. The fact that there's a very clear cliff where money runs out instills a sense of urgency that can create a massive level of pressure on the owners and everybody in the company. The fact that the startup doesn't respect the specialist but elevates the doer with the can-do attitude cultivates an environment of work and pressure and effort and grind. The owner is closer and they have a lot at stake, so they can get emotional and they're not constrained by rules and governance and compliance. Things are also in a process sense immature and things are unpredictable. Challenges have never been seen before, so everything's potentially drama. For some people, all of that sounds toxic, and depending on the mix of people, it can be. But it isn't by default. I know a lot of people who have worked in scale-ups and would never ever trade. And no, they're not psychopaths. They truly love it. They love the energy, the drive, and the camaraderie that often isn't there at the corporation. There's no right or wrong, but what is important is understanding the nature of the kinds of businesses and what you function best with, and then picking what works for you. Scale-ups are intense and fast and messy and alive. Corporations are structured and strategic and stable. Neither is toxic by default. They simply operate under different physics. And the important thing is knowing which environment makes you thrive. What are your experiences with working in scale-ups and corporations? Share in the comments, learn from others. Remember to subscribe. See you soon.